The camera rolled as Zuri Bennett's head disappeared beneath the surface of Haeundae Beach. What started as a simple wade into the shallow Korean waters had turned into a nightmare broadcast live on a dozen tourist phones. The rip current, invisible, silent, deadly, had seized her ankles and pulled her past the safety markers before she could even scream. Above the surface, excited voices mixed Korean with broken English. Is she okay? Someone help. Keep filming. Below, salt water filled Zuri's lungs as her 28-year-old heart hammered against her ribs in the familiar, terrifying rhythm of arrhythmia. The childhood pool incident flashed through her oxygen-starved mind. The same helplessness, the same burning chest, the same certainty that this was how it would end. Then a hand broke through the foam. Strong fingers wrapped around her wrist, pulling upward with methodical precision. Through the underwater haze, she glimpsed a man in an expensive dark suit, his black hair floating like seaweed as he fought the current that had claimed her. They breached the surface together. Zuri gasped, coughed, gasped again as Han Jae-min, though she didn't know his name yet, pressed his palm against her back, guiding each desperate breath. "I have you," he said in perfect, unaccented English, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Breathe with me." The rescue boats were already approaching, their sirens cutting through the late afternoon air. Cameras captured every second. The mysterious man in the ruined suit, the black American woman clinging to consciousness, the intimate moment when he wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and whispered something that made her nod. What they couldn't capture was the electricity that passed between their hands, or the way Jaemin's own breathing faltered, not from exertion, but from recognition. He'd been that drowning child once. Now, 34 years old and worth more than most small nations, he was the one pulling someone else from the depths. As the paramedics loaded Zuri onto the rescue boat, she managed one clear look at her savior. Dark eyes, strong jawline, and something in his expression that suggested this wasn't his first time defying the sea. "Who are you?" she whispered. He stepped back into the crowd, expensive watch glinting on his wrist, already becoming a ghost. But the cameras had caught everything. Within the hour, Nanja Busan Rescue would be trending across 3 continents, and neither of their lives would ever be the same. Who was this man who saved lives like it was his secret profession? And why was he already walking away? Sometimes the most dangerous currents are the ones that pull you toward exactly where you need to be. If you're as hooked as Zuri was by that mysterious hand beneath the waves, subscribe now, because this is just the beginning of a love story that will challenge everything you think you know about fate, sacrifice, and finding your place in a world that seems determined to wash you away. The taste of salt and copper filled Zuri's mouth as consciousness returned in sterile white waves. Hospital lights. The steady beep of a heart monitor that seemed to mock her irregular rhythm. "Miss Bennett, can you hear me?" A nurse with kind eyes leaned over her, adjusting an IV drip. "You're at Busan National University Hospital. You were in a water accident." Memory crashed back like a second tide. The beach, the current, the hand. The man who... Zuri's voice came out as a croak. "Is he here?" Your rescuer left his contact information with the front desk, but he asked not to be disturbed. Very private man. The nurse's tone held a note of curiosity that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Zuri struggled to sit up, her chest tight with more than just swallowed seawater. "I need to thank him. Tomorrow. Rest now." But the nurse was already moving toward the door, where a tall figure in a fresh suit was speaking quietly with a doctor. Even from behind, Zuri recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head slightly tilted as he listened. When he turned, their eyes met through the doorway glass. Han Jae-min looked different in dry clothes, more intimidating somehow. The expensive fabric and perfect posture marked him as someone important, someone who belonged in boardrooms rather than rescue boats. But his eyes held the same steady intensity that had guided her breathing in the water. He entered the room like he was approaching a business negotiation, controlled and careful. "How are you feeling?" English again, that slight formality that wasn't quite an accent. "Like I swallowed half the Yellow Sea." Zuri managed a weak smile. Thank you. I mean it. You saved my life. Something flickered across his expression. Discomfort, maybe, or pain. Anyone would have done the same. But anyone didn't. You did. She studied his face, looking for clues. I'm Zuri Bennett, screenwriter from Los Angeles, apparently terrible at judging ocean safety. Jae-min. He didn't offer a last name, and his handshake was brief, professional. You should be more careful. The currents here are unpredictable. You seem to know them pretty well. For the first time, his composure cracked slightly. I grew up near the water. The understatement hung between them like a question neither wanted to ask. Zuri had written enough characters to recognize someone carrying secrets, and this man wore his like expensive cologne. Subtle but unmistakable. Are you staying in Busan long? He asked, clearly changing the subject. 3 months. Sabbatical. I was supposed to be writing about finding myself in a foreign country, not nearly dying on day 1. She gestured to the IV needle in her arm. This wasn't exactly the cultural immersion I had in mind. Korea has other ways to challenge visitors. Was that almost a smile? Before she could be sure, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Voices in rapid Korean, the distinctive click of cameras, someone saying exclusive in heavily accented English. Jaemin's entire demeanor shifted, shoulders tensing as he moved instinctively between Zuri and the door. The media is here. Media? For a beach rescue? But he was already pulling out his phone, fingers moving over the screen with practiced efficiency. A text sent, another received. A brief conversation in Korean that sounded more like a crisis management meeting than casual chat. There's something you need to understand, he said, still not facing her. The rescue was filmed. It's already online. Zuri's stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with her recent drowning. How bad? Bad enough. He finally turned, and she saw something in his expression that made her pulse spike for reasons that had nothing to do with cardiac arrhythmia. The headlines are calling it a romantic rescue. They're speculating about who you are, who I am, what our relationship might be. We don't have a relationship. We met 3 hours ago. Try telling that to the Korean entertainment media. His phone buzzed again. They've identified you as an American screenwriter. They're calling you beautiful, mysterious, possibly connected to Hollywood. Heat rose in Zuri's cheeks. And you? They don't know yet, but they will. The way he said it, with resignation rather than fear, told her everything she needed to know about how much he had to lose. By morning, the mystery would be solved, the speculation would explode, and 2 strangers bound by salt water and circumstance would find themselves at the center of a storm that made rip currents look like gentle waves. The morning news hit like a tsunami. Mysterious hero saves drowning American screenwriter in romantic beach rescue. Who is the mystery man? Billionaire CEO Han Jae-min spotted at Hyundai. Golden couple. Tech mogul's secret romance with Hollywood beauty. Zuri stared at her phone from her hospital bed, watching her life become international entertainment. The video had been shared 3 million times. Someone had enhanced the footage, zooming in on every touch, every glance, creating a slow-motion romance that existed entirely in the editing. Her own face looked back at her from a dozen gossip sites, hair plastered to her skull, eyes wide with shock. But somehow, impossibly, photogenic in the way that only near-death experiences and expensive camera phones could achieve. And Jae-min. God, Jae-min looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne commercial. Even soaking wet and performing CPR, he had the kind of presence that made people stop scrolling. Her phone rang. Maya's face filled the screen, eyebrows raised so high they disappeared under her colorful braids. Girl. What in the entire hell is happening over there? It's not what it looks like, Zuri said automatically. It looks like you nearly died and got saved by a Korean billionaire who looks like he was carved by angels with very specific fantasies. Maya held up her own phone, showing the same viral video. The comments section is losing its collective mind. Half of them are calling you the luckiest woman alive. The other half are calling you a gold digger who staged the whole thing. I nearly died, Maya. Actual cardiac distress, salt water in my lungs, the whole thing. I know, baby. I know. Maya's expression softened. Are you okay? Really okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally. Zuri gestured at the phone screen. This is insane. I came here to write in peace, not become the star of some international dating scandal. And the billionaire? What's he like? Before Zuri could answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. She looked up to find Jae-min entering with a woman in a perfectly tailored red blazer and designer glasses. The woman carried herself like someone accustomed to cleaning up other people's messes. Maya, I have to go. Text me everything. And Zuri, be careful. This kind of attention can get complicated fast. The video call ended, just as the woman in red approached the bed. Miss Bennett, I'm Yoon Se-ra, Director of Public Relations for Han Industries. She shook Zuri's hand with the efficiency of someone who charged by the minute. We need to discuss damage control. Damage control? Zuri looked between them. For saving my life? For the media circus that's currently painting you as either a romantic heroine or a opportunistic fortune hunter, Se-ra said bluntly. Neither narrative serves anyone's interests. Jaemin moved to the window, looking out at the street below, where a small crowd of photographers had gathered. The stock market opened down 2% on speculation about my personal life. The board is concerned. The board? Han Industries is publicly traded, Se-ra explained. Investor confidence is tied to stability, predictability. A mysterious romance with an American woman raises questions about focus, judgment, future decision-making. Zuri felt a surge of the same frustration that had driven her to Korea in the first place. The sense of being reduced to a plot device in someone else's story. So, what do you want me to do? Disappear. Pretend it never happened. We want you to help us manage the narrative, Se-ra said. Control the story before it controls us. How? Jaemin turned from the window. A public relationship. Carefully managed, time-limited, mutually beneficial. Zuri blinked. You want me to fake date you? I want to protect both our reputations while the media attention dies down. You get to finish your sabbatical in peace. I get to focus on my company's upcoming product launch. And if I say no, then you'll spend the next 3 months being followed by paparazzi who will document every coffee you buy and every friend you make. They'll dig into your personal history, your family, your reasons for being in Korea. Se-ra's tone was matter-of-fact. They'll turn your private healing journey into public entertainment. Zuri closed her eyes, feeling the familiar flutter of her irregular heartbeat. 3 months ago, she'd been a successful screenwriter with a stable life in Los Angeles. Then came the panic attacks, the creative block, the crushing realization that success wasn't the same as happiness. Korea was supposed to be her reset button, not the setting for an even more complex drama. What exactly would this fake relationship involve? Public appearances, carefully staged candid moments, social media presence that suggests genuine affection without confirming anything. Se-ra pulled out a tablet, showing what looked like a detailed contract. 30 days. After that, we stage a gentle, mutual breakup, and you both move on with your lives. No kissing, Zuri said immediately. No touching that could be misinterpreted. And I want final approval on any statements made about me. Done. Jaemin's quick agreement surprised her. Are there other conditions? She studied his face, looking for the catch. Men like him didn't rescue drowning women and then offer fake relationships without complicated motivations. But his expression was steady, professional, almost boring. Almost. One more thing, she said. I want to know why you really did this. Not the rescue. Any decent person would have done that. But this arrangement. What are you protecting? For the first time since entering the room, Jaemin's composed mask slipped. Something raw flickered in his dark eyes. Fear, maybe, or guilt. My company is launching a coastal safety app next month. TideSafe. It maps rip currents in real time, sends alerts to beachgoers' phones. Yesterday's incident was exactly what the app was designed to prevent. He paused, choosing his words carefully. If the media focuses on a rescue romance instead of a technology failure, it protects the launch, protects jobs, protects people who need the app to work. It was a good answer. Too good. But Zuri had learned to recognize truth wrapped in careful editing, and something in his voice told her this wasn't the whole story. Still, 30 days of fake dating was better than 3 months of real harassment. "All right," she said. "Let's make a deal." What she didn't know was that some tides can't be controlled, no matter how carefully you try to manage them. The contract signing happened in a private room at the hospital, witnessed by lawyers, publicists, and the kind of clinical efficiency that turned human emotion into manageable corporate policy. Zuri read every word twice. 30 days of public appearances, weekly photo opportunities, coordinated social media posts, a script for interviews that painted their meeting as serendipitous, and their connection as developing naturally. Item 7. She pointed to a clause near the bottom. No overnight stays without prior approval from both parties. Standard protection, Sarah explained. Maintains credibility without crossing personal boundaries. And this? Zuri indicated another line. All physical contact will be limited to hand-holding, arm-linking, and brief embraces appropriate for public consumption. Jae-min cleared his throat. Korean media is particularly focused on body language. We need to look comfortable without providing ammunition for speculation. As she signed her name, Zuri felt like she was agreeing to perform her own life. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come to Korea to escape the artificial constraints of Hollywood, only to end up bound by an even more restrictive script. The first test came 3 hours later. "Ready?" Jae-min asked, offering his arm as they approached the hospital's main exit. Through the glass doors, she could see at least 20 photographers waiting, ready as someone can be for fake dating their rescue hero. She muttered. His mouth quirked upward, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. "Just remember, we're taking things slow, getting to know each other, cautiously optimistic." The doors slid open and the world exploded into camera flashes. Questions flew in Korean and English. "How long have you known each other? Is this serious? Will you be staying in Korea? Are you planning to work together?" Jaemin's transformation was immediate and complete. The reserved businessman became a man clearly smitten, but trying to maintain dignity. He guided Zuri through the crowd with protective care, one hand on her back, leaning down to murmur what looked like sweet reassurances, but were actually navigation instructions. "Smile like you're still a little overwhelmed but happy," he said softly. "Touch my arm like you're steadying yourself." She followed his lead, letting herself look slightly dazed, which wasn't difficult, and grateful. When a reporter asked directly about their relationship status, she glanced at Jae-min with what she hoped looked like bashful uncertainty. "We're just getting to know each other," she said. "It's been a very intense 24 hours. Mr. Han, are you concerned about the impact on your business? My personal life and my professional responsibilities are separate matters," he replied smoothly. "Right now my focus is on making sure Miss Bennett recovers fully." It was a perfect answer. Protective without being possessive. Private without being secretive. As they reached the waiting car, he opened her door with the kind of consideration that made several photographers sigh audibly. Once they were safely inside with the windows tinted black, Jae-min slumped against his seat. "Well done," Sarah said from the front passenger seat. Social media response is already positive. The narrative is shifting from mysterious circumstances to sweet romance. "How long before we can do that again?" Zuri asked. 3 days. There's a gallery opening in Gangnam on Friday. Art world attendance, sophisticated crowd, good backdrop for the getting to know each other phase. Zuri stared out the window at the Busan skyline. Somewhere in this city was the quiet writing retreat she'd planned, the simple life she'd wanted to build. Instead, she was being driven through traffic in a car that probably cost more than her Los Angeles apartment, planning fake dates with a man whose real name she'd learned less than 24 hours ago. Her phone buzzed with notifications. Instagram followers had tripled. Her mentions were a mix of heart-eyed emojis and snake symbols. Someone had already created a hashtag. Not her tied couple. "This is surreal," she said. "It gets easier," Jae-min said, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure. "The key is remembering that it's temporary." "Is it?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. She'd meant to ask about the media attention, the public interest, the corporate necessity. But looking at his profile as he stared out his own window, she realized she might have been asking something else entirely. He didn't answer. But his hand, resting on the seat between them, moved slightly closer to hers. A movement so subtle it might have been accidental. It might have been. 23 hours into their fake relationship, Zuri was already learning that the most dangerous lies are the ones that feel like they could be true. The TideSafe office occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Busan's Marine City district, all clean lines and ocean views. Jae-min led Zuri through the open workspace where young developers hunched over multiple monitors, turning complex current data into life-saving simplicity. The app goes live in 3 weeks, he explained, stopping at a wall-mounted display showing real-time water conditions around Korea's coastline. It integrates satellite data, local weather stations, and predictive modeling to identify dangerous current conditions before they trap swimmers. Like the one that got me. Exactly like the one that got you. He tapped the screen where Haeundae Beach showed yellow caution indicators. Yesterday afternoon this should have been red. We're still calibrating the sensitivity. Zuri studied the interface. Clean, intuitive, the kind of design that could actually save lives if people bothered to check it. This is what you meant about protecting the launch. The rescue video has generated more awareness for coastal safety than 3 years of marketing campaigns. But if the media focuses on our personal story instead of the technology, people die. People die. She understood now why he'd been willing to construct an elaborate fake relationship with a stranger. This wasn't about protecting his reputation or his stock price. It was about making sure beachgoers actually downloaded and used an app that could prevent tragedies like hers. Still, something about his explanation felt incomplete, like a screenplay with crucial scenes left on the cutting room floor. Can I ask you something? She leaned against the conference room table where he'd spread out beta testing reports. And I want a real answer, not a PR answer. His shoulders tensed slightly. Okay. Yesterday, when you pulled me out of that current, you moved like someone who'd done it before. Professional-level water rescue, medical knowledge, completely calm under pressure. That doesn't come from growing up near the water. Jaemin's hands stilled on the papers he'd been organizing. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of air conditioning and the distant tap of keyboards from the main office. I nearly drowned when I was 8, he said finally. Sokcho Beach during a family vacation. I wandered too far from shore, got caught in an undertow. My father jumped in after me, but he wasn't a strong swimmer. Zuri felt her chest tighten. What happened? A lifeguard saved us both, but my father never recovered from the guilt that his son had almost died because he couldn't protect him. He enrolled me in every water safety course available. Swimming, diving, rescue techniques, first aid. By the time I was 12, I was certified to teach lifeguarding. And your father? Died in a car accident when I was 16. His voice remained steady, but she caught the slight pause before he continued. He never saw the ocean again after that day. Spent the rest of his life avoiding beaches, boats, anything that reminded him of his failure. The pieces clicked into place like frames in a film sequence. TideSafe isn't just about business. It's about making sure other 8-year-olds don't wander into currents their parents can't see. Making sure other fathers don't spend their lives afraid of the water. He looked up at her, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression was completely unguarded. It's about the rescue I needed yesterday not being necessary tomorrow. Zuri felt something shift inside her chest. Not the familiar flutter of arrhythmia, but something warmer and more dangerous. This man, who'd wrapped corporate efficiency around childhood trauma and turned personal loss into public service, was nothing like the carefully controlled billionaire she'd agreed to fake date. This man was someone she could actually fall for, which was precisely the problem. The gallery opening on Friday, she said, forcing herself back to safer ground. What's our story? How did this develop between hospital discharge and art appreciation? You've been recovering at a private residence. I've been checking on you daily, bringing meals, making sure you're comfortable. We've been talking about your writing, about Korea, about the cultural differences that make simple conversations feel significant. And we're at the gallery because I want to show you something beautiful. Because you mentioned loving contemporary art in one of our conversations. Because a man who's beginning to care about a woman wants to share the things that matter to him. The way he said it, with the kind of quiet conviction that made fiction sound like fact, sent heat up her neck. "You're good at this," she said. "Good at what?" "Making lies sound true." Something flickered in his eyes. "Yes, I am." The problem with fake dating someone who excels at making lies sound true is that eventually you stop being able to tell the difference. The Busan Modern Art Gallery glittered with the kind of sophisticated crowd that treated Friday night openings as competitive social sporting events. Zuri had spent an hour getting ready, finally settling on a simple black dress that Maya had insisted she pack for emergencies. This definitely qualified as an emergency. Jaemin appeared at her hotel suite door precisely at 7, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most cars. But it was the single white rose he carried, understated, elegant, perfect, that made her stomach flutter in ways that had nothing to do with cardiac arrhythmia. "For the cameras?" she asked, accepting the flower. "For you," he said simply. "You mentioned liking flowers that don't try too hard." She had mentioned that 3 days ago, during one of their daily recovery check-ins that had evolved from clinical updates to genuine conversations. The fact that he'd remembered and translated it into such a thoughtful gesture made her chest tight. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. The gallery was a strategic choice, sophisticated enough to suggest serious intentions, public enough to generate the right kind of coverage, artsy enough to provide conversation topics that went beyond their rescue romance. They moved through the crowd with practiced ease, Jaemin's hand resting lightly on her back as he introduced her to business associates, art collectors, cultural influencers. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple in the early stages of real affection. Comfortable, but not quite settled. Interested, but not presumptuous. "You're a natural at this," she murmured as they paused in front of a particularly striking ocean-themed installation. "Years of corporate functions," he replied. "Though usually I'm alone. By choice? By necessity. Dating as a public figure in Korea is complicated. Every relationship becomes a performance. Every private moment potential scandal material." Zuri studied his profile as he examined the art. "Is that why you agreed to this arrangement? Because it's safer than the real thing? Maybe." He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Or maybe because the real thing is more frightening than the fake version. Before she could process what he meant, a photographer appeared at their elbow. "Mr. Han, Miss Bennett, could we get a photo in front of the water sculpture?" They moved into position automatically, Jaemin's arm circling her waist as she leaned slightly into his side. The pose looked natural, intimate but not possessive. When the flash fired, Zuri was surprised to realize she hadn't been performing at all. "Beautiful couple," the photographer said, reviewing the shots. "You can see the connection." After he moved on, they stayed in the same position for a moment longer than necessary. "Zuri," Jaemin said quietly. "Yes? When this month is over, what happens then?" The question hung between them like the installation's suspended glass fragments. Beautiful, fragile, potentially sharp if handled carelessly. "I finish my sabbatical, write my screenplay, go back to Los Angeles." She kept her voice steady. "What we agreed. And if things change, things won't change." But even as she said it, Zuri felt the lie settle uncomfortably in her chest. Things had already changed. Somewhere between the hospital room negotiations and the TideSafe office revelations, and this moment standing in front of art that captured the exact color of his eyes, she'd stopped performing and started feeling. Which was exactly what she couldn't afford to do. "We should look at more art," she said, stepping away from both the sculpture and his touch. "Of course." They spent the rest of the evening maintaining perfect distance, close enough to look connected, far enough to remember that connection was temporary. When they left the gallery, several photographers captured their exit. Zuri laughing at something Jaemin had whispered, his hand steadying her as she navigated the steps in heels. both of them looking like people who were falling in love despite their best efforts to resist. The images would be online within the hour. Tide couple would trend again. Stock prices would stabilize. The Tide Safe launch would proceed without romantic distraction. Everything was going according to plan. So why did success feel like the beginning of something much more dangerous? Because the best fake relationships are the ones where you stop needing to fake anything at all. Saturday morning at Jigalchi Fish Market was chaos in the best possible way. Vendors calling prices in rapid-fire Korean. Tourists snapping photos of octopus still moving in their tanks. The salt and sea smell that reminded Zuri why she'd been both terrified and fascinated by the ocean all her life. This wasn't on the public appearance schedule, she pointed out, following Jaemin through the maze of stalls. Seira suggested something more casual. Less gallery sophistication, more authentic cultural exchange. He stopped at a vendor selling the largest crabs Zuri had ever seen. But mostly, I wanted to show you something that matters to me. Fish markets matter to you? Food matters to me, especially food that connects to place, to history. He spoke briefly to the vendor in Korean, then turned back to her. My grandmother brought me here every Saturday when I was young. She taught me that you can understand a culture by watching how its people feed each other. As if to prove his point, the vendor handed Zuri a small cup of something that smelled like the ocean and looked like liquid courage. Sea cucumber soup, Jaemin explained. Traditional hangover cure, but also good for general health. Are you trying to cure me or kill me? Trust me. She met his eyes, saw genuine encouragement rather than challenge, and downed the soup in one swallow. It tasted like concentrated seawater with a faint sweetness that lingered pleasantly. Not terrible, she admitted. High praise from someone who survived yesterday's sea urchin rice. They moved through the market like old friends, sampling foods that ranged from delicious to terrifying, with Jaemin serving as translator, cultural guide, and occasional rescuer from overly enthusiastic vendors. Somewhere between the grilled mackerel and the surprisingly sweet fermented rice cake, Zuri realized she was having actual fun. This is nice, she said, accepting a napkin to wipe sauce from her fingers. Nice enough for a real second date? The question caught her off guard. What? If we'd met under different circumstances. If there were no cameras, no contract, no corporate board to consider. Would you want to do this again? Zuri looked around at the organized chaos of the market, at the way Jaemin moved through it with obvious affection and deep familiarity, at the way he'd remembered that she liked trying new foods, and had crafted an entire morning around that single preference. Yes, she said honestly. I would. Something in his expression shifted, became warmer and more uncertain at the same time. Good, because I would too. They were standing close enough that she could see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, could smell the subtle cologne that mixed with the market's salt air. For a moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the crowded space. Then her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Girl, you're all over Korean Twitter again. Market date pics. People are calling him your Tide Hands because of how he guides you through crowds. Tide Hands? Jaemin read over her shoulder. Korean Twitter has opinions about your protective hand placement. Is that good or bad? Depends on whether you want to be known for your rescue technique or your guiding women through fish markets technique. He laughed, a real laugh that transformed his entire face. I can live with either. As they walked back toward the main street, Zuri found herself cataloging details. The way he automatically moved to the traffic side of the sidewalk, how he slowed his pace to match hers, the fact that he'd somehow managed to carry all their market purchases without making her feel like she needed to offer help. Jaemin, she said as they reached his car. Thank you. For this. It felt real? Real. He opened her car door, but before she could get in, he caught her hand. Zuri, what if we stopped pretending this is only temporary? Her heart stuttered. Not arrhythmia this time, but pure emotional vertigo. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between the hospital and the art gallery and this morning's sea cucumber soup, I stopped acting. His thumb traced across her knuckles. I'm saying that I care about you. Actually care, not contract care. She stared at their joined hands, at the way his fingers fit between hers like they'd been designed for exactly this purpose. The contract says 30 days. The contract can be modified. Your board, your stock price, your company launch will survive regardless. He stepped closer. What I need to know is whether you're willing to find out what happens when we stop managing the narrative and start writing our own story. Standing in the afternoon sunshine with her hand in his, Zuri realized that some questions couldn't be answered with words. They could only be answered with the kind of leap of faith that terrified people who'd already learned how quickly the current could change. They didn't go back to her hotel or his office or any of the public spaces where their relationship lived in carefully managed moments. Instead, Jaemin drove them to a quiet stretch of Gwangali Beach, where the late afternoon sun turned the water into liquid gold, and the tourists had mostly gone home. "No cameras here," he said as they walked along the tide line. "No contracts, no public appearances, just us. Just us doing what? Talking. Actually, talking." He stopped near a cluster of rocks, away from the few remaining beachgoers. "If we're going to move beyond the arrangement, I need you to understand some things." Zuri settled onto the sun-warmed stone beside him, close enough to hear him over the gentle waves, but far enough to maintain emotional safety. "I'm listening." The rescue video showed a clean save, hero narrative, everything wrapped up neatly, but it wasn't clean for me. He picked up a piece of sea glass, rolling it between his fingers. "When I saw you go under, I was back in Sokcho, 8 years old, water filling my lungs. My father's face when he realized he couldn't reach me. But you went in anyway. I went in because of the fear, not despite it. Every rescue I've done since then, and yes, there have been others, is me trying to rewrite that story. Trying to be the person who saves instead of the person who needs saving." Zuri felt something shift in her understanding of him. "How many others?" 17 people over 15 years. I keep a private count." He looked at her directly. "The media doesn't know, because I work very hard to keep my life compartmentalized. Business, personal, and what I do in the water are 3 separate worlds. Until now. Until now." He set down the sea glass and faced her completely. "But there's something else you need to know. The reason I learned water rescue, the reason I built Tide Safe, the reason I can't just be a normal businessman who occasionally saves tourists. It's not just about my father." The weight of his words settled between them like sinking stone. "My father's brother, my uncle, was the lifeguard who saved us that day. He died 2 years later in a rescue attempt at Busan Harbor. He saved 3 people from a capsized boat, but he couldn't save himself." Jaemin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "My father blamed himself for that too. Said Uncle Minjun wouldn't have become obsessed with water safety if he hadn't needed to save us." Zuri felt her chest tighten with a familiar mix of sympathy and recognition. Survivor's guilt. Generational survivor's guilt. I carry not just my father's trauma, but my uncle's sacrifice. Every person I pull from the water is me trying to balance an equation that can't be balanced. The honesty was brutal and beautiful, the kind of revelation that changed everything between 2 people. Zuri understood now why he'd been willing to construct elaborate fake relationships rather than risk real intimacy. Real love meant sharing this level of pain. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Of course." She rolled up her left sleeve, revealing a thin white scar that ran from her wrist toward her elbow. "I wasn't exactly truthful about my cardiac issue either. I do have arrhythmia, but it didn't start randomly. When I was 12, I had what my family called a pool accident." Jaemin's attention focused completely on her face. "I was at a friend's birthday party. Someone dared me to swim the length of the pool underwater, no coming up for air. I made it about halfway before I panicked, tried to surface, and cracked my head on the diving board." She touched the scar unconsciously. "I needed 17 stitches and spent 3 days in the hospital with a concussion. But the real damage was to my heart rhythm. The trauma, the oxygen deprivation. Something about the combination triggered an irregular heartbeat that still flares up when I'm stressed or scared. Like when you were caught in the rip current. Exactly like when I was caught in the rip current. I wasn't just drowning from water in my lungs. I was drowning from my own heart forgetting how to beat properly." They sat in silence for a moment, Two people who'd found each other through water-based trauma, now sharing the scars that shaped them. "So, we're both damaged," Jaemin said finally. "We're both survivors," Zuri corrected. "There's a difference." He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with cardiac irregularity. "Zuri," he said, and his voice was different now, softer, more uncertain. "What I said earlier about stopping the pretense, I heard you. And?" She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers with deliberate care. "I think I stopped pretending sometime between the sea cucumber soup and right now." The moment when two people stop performing their feelings and start feeling them is always terrifying, especially when those feelings are strong enough to pull you under if you're not careful. Monday morning shattered their weekend bubble like a hammer through glass. Zuri woke to her phone buzzing with notifications from numbers she didn't recognize. Social media mentions that made her stomach drop, and a text from Maya that simply said, "Check the news. Now." The headline made her blood freeze. "Gold Digger's Gambit, American Screenwriter's Secret Plan to Trap Korean Billionaire." The article, published by a major entertainment news site, painted her as a calculating opportunist who had researched Han Jae-min before arriving in Korea, deliberately chosen Haeundae Beach for her accident, and orchestrated the entire rescue as an elaborate setup for financial gain. Supporting evidence included screenshots of her Google searches about successful Korean businessmen, research she'd done for cultural preparation, a photo of her LA apartment showing Korean language learning books, visible in the background of a video call with Maya, financial records showing her recent writing work had been sporadic, the career struggles that had led to her sabbatical, anonymous quotes from sources close to the investigation, suggesting the whole relationship was a business transaction. But the cruelest touch was the final paragraph. Sources confirm that Bennett pitched her rescue romance story to multiple Hollywood producers before leaving Los Angeles, suggesting the entire Korean incident was planned as material for a future screenplay. Han Industries stock, which had stabilized following news of the relationship, dropped 3% in early morning trading. Zuri's hand shook as she scrolled through the comments. "I knew something was fishy about this. American women will do anything for money. Poor Jaemin Oppa being used like this. She's not even that pretty without all the rescue drama lighting." Her phone rang. Jaemin's name on the screen. "Tell me you didn't see it yet," he said without preamble. "I saw it. Zuri, I need you to know. We're handling this. Seira is already preparing a response. Our legal team is investigating the source of the information. And I'm calling an emergency board meeting to address the stock situation. It's all fake," she said numbly. "Every piece of evidence, every implication. But it sounds so convincing. I know it's fake. Anyone who actually knows you would know it's fake. But the board doesn't know me. The shareholders don't know me. The Korean public doesn't know me." She walked to her hotel window, looking down at the street where a small crowd of photographers had gathered. How did they get my financial records? My apartment photos? My search history? Professional investigation service, most likely. Someone with significant resources wanted to destroy your credibility. Who would do that? Someone who benefits from destabilizing either my company or my personal life. His voice turned sharp with anger. Or both. A new notification popped up on her phone. Another article, this one with photos of her leaving the market with Jae-min on Saturday, zoomed in to make their body language look calculating rather than affectionate. The caption read, "The performance continues. Fake girlfriend maintains act despite mounting evidence." "Jae-min," she said, suddenly understanding the scope of what was happening. "This isn't just about discrediting me. This is about destroying your judgment credibility right before the TideSafe launch." "What do you mean?" "If the board and the public believe you're emotionally compromised, that you fell for an obvious con artist, how can they trust your business decisions, your technology assessments, your leadership?" The silence on the other end told her she was right. "You need to distance yourself from me," she continued. "Publicly, before this gets worse." "Absolutely not. Jaemin, be practical. Your company, Can go to hell if it means throwing you to the wolves. His voice was steel. We fight this together, or we don't fight at all. Before she could argue, another call came in. Seh-ra. Conference call, Jaemin said. Hold on. Within seconds, they were connected to a three-way conversation that felt like a war council. The situation is manageable, Seh-ra said immediately. But it requires decisive action. We need to get ahead of the narrative before it metastasizes. What are you recommending? Jaemin asked. Press conference this afternoon. Both of you, unified front, direct refutation of the allegations. We present evidence of the legitimate Google searches, explain the apartment photos, provide context for the financial records. Most importantly, we announce your engagement. What? Zuri and Jaemin said simultaneously. Fake engagement, obviously, but convincing enough to demonstrate serious commitment. It transforms the narrative from gold digger seduces businessman to couple under attack by jealous forces. Immediately, elevates public sympathy and explains why someone would want to destroy the relationship. Zuri felt like the walls of her hotel room were closing in. I can't fake an engagement. You can fake it for 2 weeks, Seh-ra said pragmatically. Long enough to stabilize the situation and identify who's behind the attack. Then, you have a mutual, dignified separation and move forward with your lives. This is insane, Zuri said. This is damage control, Seh-ra replied. The alternative is 3 more months of character assassination that destroys both your reputations. Jaemin's voice was quiet when he spoke. Zuri, it's your choice. But whatever you decide, I'm standing with you. Sometimes the only way to fight a lie is with a bigger, more convincing lie. And sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones that feel like they should be true. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning, which meant they had 18 hours to prepare for the performance of their lives. Seh-ra had delivered a carefully researched engagement backstory, complete with a timeline, a ring, borrowed from the company's jewelry client, and talking points that painted their love story as destiny interrupted by jealous sabotage. But first, Jaemin insisted they needed to talk privately. Gwangan Bridge, he said, picking her up at her hotel as the sun was setting. Best view in Busan, and the photographers can't follow us onto the pedestrian walkway without being obvious. The bridge stretched across the bay like a string of diamonds, its lights reflecting on the dark water below. They walked to the center in silence, the city spreading out around them in all directions. Are you sure about tomorrow? Zuri asked, gripping the railing as wind whipped her hair around her face. I'm sure about protecting you. Everything else is negotiable. She studied his profile in the bridge lights. Even if it cost you everything? Your privacy, your company's stability, your board's confidence? Especially then. He turned to face her fully. Do you want to know something that's not in any contract or press strategy? What? I don't care if they believe we're engaged. I don't care if the stock price stabilizes or crashes. I don't care if the board thinks I've lost my mind. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. What I care about is that 3 days ago, watching you laugh at something ridiculous a fish vendor said, I realized I was falling in love with you. Actually, genuinely, completely falling in love. Zuri's heart hammered against her ribs. Jaemin, I know the timing is terrible. I know the circumstances are impossible. I know we're about to fake an engagement to save our reputations while I'm trying to tell you that my feelings stopped being fake somewhere between the hospital and right now. The lights of the city blurred as tears gathered in her eyes. You can't love me. You don't even know me. I know you're brave enough to travel alone to a foreign country to restart your life. I know you're kind enough to worry about my company's stability, even when your own reputation is being destroyed. I know you make terrible faces when you eat sea cucumber, but you eat it anyway because you don't want to hurt people's feelings. His hands came up to frame her face. I know you have a scar on your wrist that you touch when you're nervous, and I know you've turned survival into strength in a way that makes me believe I could do the same. This is too fast, too intense, too complicated. I know that too. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. But I also know that if we're going to stand in front of those cameras tomorrow and tell the world we're engaged, I want you to know that for me, it won't be entirely an act. She could feel the warmth of his breath, could see the reflection of bridge lights in his dark eyes. One step forward, and she'd be in his arms. One moment of surrender, and this fake relationship would become irrevocably real. Instead, she stepped back. "I can't," she whispered. "Not like this. Not when everything is so tangled up with publicity and damage control and corporate strategy. If this happens, I need to know it's because we chose it, not because we were forced into it by circumstances." Pain flickered across his expression, but he nodded slowly. "You're right. Tomorrow we fake the engagement. We survive the press conference. We identify who's trying to destroy us, and we stop them." She wrapped her arms around herself as the wind picked up. "And then, when all of this is over, when we're not performing for cameras or protecting each other from scandals, then maybe we figure out what's real. And if what's real is that we don't work outside of crisis situations, then we'll know that too." They stood there for a long moment, close enough to touch, but not touching, surrounded by the glittering lights of a city that had watched their entire relationship unfold in public view. "The ring," Jae-min said finally, pulling out the small velvet box Se-ra had provided. "For tomorrow, so we look prepared." He opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond solitaire, beautiful enough to be believable, understated enough to match her personality. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. "Should I?" He gestured vaguely toward getting down on one knee. "God, no. Let's save some things for when they're not performance art." He laughed, the tension breaking slightly. "Fair enough." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Zuri felt the weight of it like a promise she wasn't sure she was ready to make. Tomorrow they would stand before the world and claim to be engaged. Tonight, they stood on a bridge above the water that had brought them together, pretending that love could be managed and feelings could be scheduled. The most dangerous bridges are the ones that look sturdy enough to hold your weight, but beautiful enough to make you forget to check the foundation. The press conference was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Se-ra had assembled a team of security personnel, legal advisors, and communications specialists who turned the hotel conference room into a fortress of message discipline. But the real magic happened when Jae-min and Zuri walked in together. The engagement ring caught the lights as Zuri took her seat, and the cameras immediately focused on it. Jae-min's hand rested protectively on her shoulder as she adjusted the microphone. They looked like what they were supposed to be, a couple under siege, but united. "Ladies and gentlemen," Se-ra began, "Mr. Han and Miss Bennett have asked to address the recent allegations directly." Jae-min spoke first, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made roomfuls of people lean forward. "The attacks on Miss Bennett's character are false, malicious, and designed to damage both her reputation and my company's upcoming product launch. We believe they are part of a coordinated effort by business competitors who benefit from destabilizing Han Industries." Then Zuri took the microphone, and her voice was steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "I came to Korea to heal from personal struggles and to write. I had no knowledge of Mr. Han's identity when I entered the water at Hyundai Beach. No plan beyond spending 3 months learning about a culture I've always admired. The suggestion that I orchestrated a near-drowning experience for financial gain is not just false. It's offensive to anyone who has experienced actual water trauma." The questions came fast and sharp. "Miss Bennett, how do you respond to evidence of your financial difficulties?" "I respond by saying that many artists go through lean periods. That doesn't make us desperate enough to risk our lives for money." "Mr. Han, are you concerned that this relationship might affect your business judgment?" "My personal happiness has only improved my professional focus. A stable family life provides the foundation for clear thinking and ethical decision-making." When a reporter asked about their engagement timeline, Zuri's answer surprised even herself with its honesty. "When someone saves your life, you see them clearly very quickly. The circumstances were dramatic, but the feelings that developed were genuine." After 30 minutes of verbal warfare, they escaped to Jae-min's car, both exhausted but oddly exhilarated. "Think it worked?" Zuri asked, slumping against the leather seat. "The stock price will tell us by market close. But more importantly, how do you feel about having our fake engagement broadcast to half of Asia?" She looked down at the borrowed ring on her finger, then at the man beside her who'd just defended her honor to a room full of sharks. I feel like we might be in serious trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where fake starts feeling real, and we forget why we were pretending in the first place. As Soul's traffic flowed around them, carrying them toward whatever came next, neither could shake the feeling that they'd just crossed a line from performance into something far more dangerous. 3 days after the press conference, Zuri found herself standing at the edge of an indoor pool at Seoul's most exclusive private athletic club, wearing a swimsuit that cost more than her monthly rent in LA, and fighting every instinct that screamed at her to run. "We don't have to do this," Jaemin said, reading her expression perfectly. He stood beside the pool in swimming shorts, looking like he belonged on the cover of a fitness magazine, rather than helping a traumatized woman face her deepest fear. "Yes, we do." Zuri's voice was steadier than her hands. "If I'm going to be in Korea for 3 months, surrounded by water, I need to know I won't panic the next time I see a wave." The swimming instructor, a kind woman named Coach Park, waited patiently at the shallow end. But Zuri's eyes were fixed on Jaemin, who'd insisted on being present for every session. "You're sure you want to watch this? It's not going to be pretty." "I'm not going anywhere." The first session was a disaster. Zuri managed to walk into the shallow end, but the moment the water reached her chest, her cardiac arrhythmia kicked in. She stumbled backward, gasping, while Jaemin waded in fully clothed to steady her. "Breathe with me," he said, the same words he'd spoken during the rescue. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. They spent 40 minutes just standing in waist-deep water, with Zuri learning to control her breathing, while her heart remembered how to beat normally. The second session was marginally better. She managed to put her face underwater for 3 seconds before panic took over. The third session, something shifted. "Tell me about the screenplay you're writing," Jaemin said, as they stood in the shallow end, his hand providing steady support at her back. "What?" "Your sabbatical project. The one you came here to write. What's it about?" Zuri realized what he was doing. Distraction therapy, giving her mind something to focus on besides the water surrounding them. It's about a woman who travels to a foreign country to reinvent herself after a career crisis. Art imitating life? Something like that. She took a small step deeper, the water now at chest level. Except in my version, she doesn't nearly drown on day 1. What happens to her instead? Another step. The water lapped at her shoulders now, but her breathing remained steady. She meets someone who challenges everything she thinks she knows about love, trust, and what it means to be brave. Someone like who? Their eyes met across the small distance between them, and Zuri felt something deeper than water surrounding her. The recognition that this conversation had stopped being about fictional characters. Someone who saves lives as a profession and a compulsion. Someone who carries his family's expectations like weights around his ankles. Someone who makes her believe that maybe healing isn't something you do alone. She was floating now, barely noticing that Coach Park had stepped back, that Jaemin's hands were no longer supporting her, that she was treading water in the deep end through sheer force of concentration on his face. "How does it end?" he asked softly. "The screenplay. I don't know yet." She swam toward him, each stroke a small victory over years of fear. "I'm still writing it." When she reached the pool's edge and pulled herself out, both of them were grinning like idiots. 25 meters, Coach Park announced proudly. "Perfect form." "I did it," Zuri breathed, hardly believing it herself. "You did it," Jaemin confirmed, his pride evident in every word. As they toweled off in comfortable silence, Zuri realized that learning to swim again was the least significant thing that had happened in that pool. Somewhere between floating and fiction, she'd stopped performing her feelings and started feeling them. The most dangerous thing about learning to trust the water is that eventually, you have to learn to trust yourself to stay afloat. The typhoon warning came at 3 a.m. on a Thursday, jolting Seoul awake with emergency alerts that lit up millions of phones simultaneously. Zuri woke to find Jaemin already dressed, pacing their suite while talking rapidly into his phone in Korean. "What's happening?" she asked, pulling on clothes. "Typhoon Maysak is moving faster than predicted. It's going to hit the southern coast in 6 hours, but the rip current warnings are already critical along Busan's beaches." His face was tight with controlled urgency. TideSafe is about to get its first real test. They rushed to the Han Industries Crisis Management Center, a high-tech command post that looked like NASA mission control. Wall-mounted screens showed satellite imagery, weather data, and most importantly, the TideSafe app's real-time current mapping across Korea's coastline. "How many people have downloaded the app?" Zuri asked, watching technicians coordinate with weather services and emergency response teams. 2 million since the press conference, Say-Ra reported, her usual composure replaced by caffeine-fueled intensity. But downloads aren't what matter now. Active usage is. People need to actually check the app before going near the water. On the main screen, red warning zones spread like blood across the digital map of Korea's beaches. Haeundae, where Zuri had nearly drowned just weeks ago, showed critical danger levels. "There," Jaemin pointed to a cluster of yellow dots on the Jeju Island display. "Hikers caught by storm surge near the coastal trail. Local emergency services are coordinating rescue, but they need real-time current data to plan the approach." Zuri watched in fascination as the crisis team worked with rescue coordinators, using TideSafe's predictive modeling to guide boats safely through waters that changed minute by minute. This wasn't just technology. It was technology with a moral imperative, born from Jaemin's childhood trauma and refined by his determination to prevent others from experiencing what he had. "We're getting reports from Busan," one of the technicians called out. 3 separate incidents where beachgoers evacuated after receiving TideSafe alerts. No injuries reported. "Sakcho Beach is reporting similar evacuation compliance," another voice added. The app warned swimmers about dangerous conditions 30 minutes before lifeguards could visually assess the threat. As the hours passed, the success stories accumulated. Families who left beaches before deadly rip currents developed. Fishing boats that altered their routes based on real-time data. Emergency responders who saved precious minutes by knowing exactly where it was safe to operate. But the real moment came at 2 p.m., when Zuri's phone buzzed with a TideSafe alert for Haeundae Beach. "Danger. Critical rip current detected. Exit water immediately. Seek higher ground." She showed the screen to Jaemin, who was deep in conversation with rescue coordinators. He glanced at it, then at her, and something passed between them. The recognition that 3 weeks ago, this alert could have saved her from nearly dying. "It works," she said simply. "It works because of you," he replied. "Your near-drowning focused media attention on coastal safety. The public cared about TideSafe because they cared about your story. Our story. Our story," he agreed, and the possessive pronoun felt less like a business strategy and more like a promise. By evening, as Typhoon Maysak moved inland and the immediate crisis passed, the statistics were impossible to ignore. TideSafe had issued over 47,000 warnings, contributed to 23 successful rescues, and helped prevent an estimated 300 water-related accidents. "The app saved lives today," Say-Ra announced to the exhausted but jubilant crisis team. "Conservative estimates suggest we prevented at least 12 fatalities." As the team celebrated their success, Zuri found herself standing beside Jaemin at the command center's windows, looking out at Seoul's glittering skyline. Somewhere out there, families were safe because of the technology they'd helped publicize, the marriage contract that had become something more meaningful than either of them had planned. "Your uncle would be proud," she said quietly. "My father, too." He paused, considering. Maybe even Jinho somehow. She didn't ask who Jinho was. The name had slipped out like a secret, and she filed it away as another piece of the puzzle that was Jaemin's carefully guarded heart. Sometimes the best way to heal from trauma is to transform it into something that prevents others from suffering the same fate. The corporate board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, but Jaemin arrived an hour early to find Kang Do-hyuk already in the Han Industries conference room, spreading documents across the polished table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. "Ah, Jaemin. Right on time." Kang's smile was predatory. "I trust you've seen this morning's financial news?" Jaemin glanced at the newspapers scattered across the table. Headlines screamed about Han Industries' stock volatility, questions about leadership stability, and most damaging of all, love or liability. CEO's romance raises investor concerns. "Let me guess," Jaemin said calmly. taking his seat at the head of the table. "You called this emergency meeting to discuss my personal life's impact on corporate performance." "I called this meeting to address the board's concerns about decision-making that appears to prioritize emotional impulses over shareholder interests." Kang opened a folder thick with printouts. "Your relationship with Miss Bennett has generated more media coverage than our last 3 product launches combined. The question is whether this represents brilliant marketing or dangerous distraction." Other board members began filtering in, serious men and women in expensive suits, carrying the kind of gravitas that came with managing billions in corporate assets. Jae-min recognized the careful neutrality in their faces. They were here to evaluate, not to attack, but that made them more dangerous than open hostility. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kang began once everyone was seated, "we're here because Han Industries stock has experienced unprecedented volatility since our CEO's rescue romance became international news. While some metrics show positive engagement, others suggest concerning trends." He clicked through a presentation that painted Jae-min's relationship as a corporate liability: distracted leadership, inconsistent messaging, resource allocation toward personal rather than business priorities. "Moreover," Kang continued, "there are questions about the authenticity of this relationship that could expose the company to accusations of market manipulation through fabricated personal narratives." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. If the board believed the relationship was fake, and worse, if they thought it was fake for the purpose of manipulating stock prices, it could trigger SEC investigations that would destroy everything Jae-min had built. "That's a serious allegation," board member Mrs. Park said carefully. "Do you have evidence of deliberate deception?" Kang smiled like a shark scenting blood. "I have evidence of a relationship that conveniently emerged at the exact moment the company needed positive media attention. I have financial records showing payments to public relations firms specializing in celebrity image management. And I have this." He displayed a photograph on the main screen, Zuri and Jae-min at the art gallery. But the image had been edited to highlight the space between them, the careful positioning, the way their smiles looked practiced rather than genuine. Professional analysis suggests this body language is consistent with performed rather than authentic intimacy. Combined with the timeline and financial expenditures, it paints a picture of elaborate corporate theater. Jae-min felt something cold settle in his chest as he realized the sophistication of Kang's attack. This wasn't just business rivalry. It was character assassination designed to destroy both his professional credibility and his personal relationship. "Furthermore," Kang continued, "I've received reports that Miss Bennett was meeting with journalists, potentially selling exclusive access to private corporate information in exchange for favorable coverage. The lie was smoothly delivered and impossible to disprove without revealing Zuri's actual meeting with the investigative reporter." Jae-min understood now that Kang had been watching them, documenting their activities, building a case designed to paint their genuine feelings as corporate fraud. "Mr. Kang," Jae-min said quietly, "are you prepared to stake your reputation on these allegations?" "I'm prepared to stake the company's future on the truth." "Good. Because the truth is that you're the one who's been manipulating media coverage." Jae-min opened his own laptop, displaying financial records he'd spent weeks compiling. "These are wire transfers from your personal accounts to media manipulation services. These are contracts with private investigation firms tasked with gathering compromising information about my personal life. This is evidence of a coordinated campaign to destabilize my leadership through personal attacks." The board members leaned forward, studying the evidence that painted Kang not as a concerned investor, but as a saboteur willing to damage the company to advance his own interests. "You've been orchestrating the negative coverage," Jae-min continued, "creating the very instability you claim to be concerned about. The question the board should be asking is whether they want to be led by someone who puts the company first, or by someone who's willing to destroy it for personal gain. The moment when corporate warfare becomes personal is the moment when everyone discovers what they're really willing to fight for." The decision to go live on national television was made in Se-ra's office at 11 p.m., 3 cups of coffee and a dozen strategic phone calls after the disastrous board meeting had ended in stalemate. "It's risky," Se-ra warned, pacing between whiteboards covered in crisis management flowcharts. "Once you're on live television, there's no controlling the narrative. No editing, no do-overs, no damage control if things go wrong. That's exactly why we have to do it, Zuri said from her position curled in the office's leather chair. Kang's strength is manipulation. Carefully edited images, selective quotes, manufactured evidence. Live television takes away his ability to control the story. Jaemin stood at the window, looking out at Seoul's midnight skyline. What exactly are we proposing to tell the world? The truth. Zuri's voice was steadier than her hands. All of it. How we met, why we agreed to the fake relationship, when it stopped being fake, and how someone has been trying to destroy us for corporate gain. That destroys the carefully constructed narrative that's kept us safe. The carefully constructed narrative is what's making us vulnerable. She stood, moving to join him at the window. Kang is using our lies against us. But he can't weaponize the truth if we tell it first. Seira stopped pacing. What about the consequences? The board will see this as confirmation that the relationship was initially deceptive. Let them. Jaemin turned from the window, his decision crystallizing. I'd rather be judged for telling the truth than destroyed by someone else's lies. The next morning, they sat across from Kim Min-jae, Korea's most respected television journalist, in a studio that felt both intimate and exposed. Cameras surrounded them like a jury, while the red light that meant live broadcast glowed like a warning. Mr. Han, Miss Bennett, Kim began. Thank you for agreeing to this interview. There have been many questions about your relationship, your engagement, and the circumstances that brought you together. This is your opportunity to set the record straight. Zuri spoke first, her voice clear and unwavering. We want to be completely honest with the Korean public. Our relationship began as a contractual arrangement designed to protect both our reputations after the beach rescue incident generated unwanted speculation. A murmur rippled through the studio audience. On social media, hashtags began trending within minutes. Contract love, truth live, tied couple. Jaemin took over the narrative. The arrangement was supposed to last 30 days. We would appear together at public events, create the impression of a developing romance, then quietly separate and move on with our lives. But something changed, Kim prompted. Everything changed, Zuri said, her eyes meeting Jaemin's across the small space between their chairs. Somewhere between the fake dates and the real conversations, we stopped performing and started feeling. When did you realize the relationship had become genuine? Jaemin's answer surprised even Zuri. The night she learned to swim 25 meters. She was so proud, so brave, and I realized that I wasn't just impressed by her courage. I was falling in love with it. And Miss Bennett? When did you know? During the typhoon crisis, watching him work to save lives through TideSafe. I saw a man who turned his childhood trauma into technology that protects others. And I knew I wanted to spend my life with someone who responds to fear by creating safety for other people. Kim leaned forward, sensing the emotional core of the story. But someone has been trying to destroy this relationship. Can you tell us about that? This was the dangerous part, the moment when they would either expose their enemy or become vulnerable to his retaliation. Jaemin made the choice for both of them. Kang Do-hyuk, a major investor in Han Industries, has been orchestrating a campaign to discredit both my professional leadership and my personal relationship. He's hired private investigators, manipulated media coverage, and spread false information designed to paint our love story as corporate fraud. The accusation landed like a bombshell in the studio. Kim's journalistic instincts immediately sharpened. That's a serious allegation. Do you have proof? We have financial records, communication logs, and contracted services that trace directly back to Mr. Kang's personal accounts. We also have evidence that he's been using this manufactured controversy to position himself for a hostile takeover of Han Industries. On screen, documents flashed by too quickly for viewers to read in detail, but the impression was clear. Meticulous evidence, carefully compiled, professionally verified. Mr. Kang has suggested that your relationship is fake, designed to manipulate stock prices and public opinion. Kim continued. How do you respond to that? Zuri leaned forward, her voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made millions of viewers lean closer to their screens. Our relationship began as something fake, and we've been honest about that. But what's real is that I nearly died in that water. What's real is that he saved my life without knowing who I was or what I could offer him in return. What's real is that we fell in love despite having every reason to remain strangers. And the engagement was initially as fake as the relationship, Jae-min admitted. We announced it to control negative media coverage. But yesterday, before we decided to come on this show, I asked Zuri to marry me. Really asked her, with no contracts or cameras or corporate strategies involved. And what did you say, Miss Bennett? Zuri's smile was radiant and genuine. I said yes. Not to the fake engagement we announced, but to the real marriage he offered. The studio erupted in applause, but Kim wasn't finished. What do you want the Korean public to know about your future together? We want them to know that love doesn't always follow the traditional script, Zuri said. Sometimes it grows from impossible circumstances, fake contracts, and the courage to tell the truth when lying would be easier. And we want them to know that TideSafe will continue its mission to protect families from water-related tragedies, regardless of what happens to us personally, Jae-min added. My uncle died saving others from drowning. If our story helps save even one life through increased water safety awareness, then everything we've been through will have been worth it. As the interview concluded and the cameras stopped rolling, Zuri and Jae-min sat in the bright lights of the television studio, holding hands like survivors of a natural disaster. Think it worked? Zuri asked. I think we just declared war on one of Korea's most powerful investors and bet our future on the Korean public's capacity for forgiveness. No regrets? Jae-min brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the gentleness of a man who'd learned to treasure what he'd nearly lost. Only that it took us so long to stop lying to each other. The most dangerous truth is the one you're afraid to tell, and the most powerful truth is the one you choose to share anyway. 31 days after they'd signed the original fake dating agreement, Zuri and Jae-min sat in the same Han Industries conference room where their arrangement had begun, but everything else had changed. The contract lay on the table between them, already voided by the revelations of their television interview. Kang Do-hyuk was facing criminal charges for corporate manipulation and securities fraud. Han Industries' stock had rebounded to record highs after the public embraced their love story with enthusiasm that surprised even Se-ra. But the real change was in their faces. The careful distance replaced by genuine intimacy. The performed affection transformed into something deeper and more sustainable. So, Jae-min said, picking up the original contract, what do we do with this? Burn it? Zuri suggested with a grin. Too dramatic. And potentially toxic. Expensive legal documents probably release dangerous fumes when incinerated. She laughed, the sound filling the conference room with warmth that no amount of corporate efficiency could manufacture. Shred it? Better. But I have a different idea. He opened his laptop and began typing, his fingers flying over the keys with the same intensity he'd brought to crisis management during the typhoon. After several minutes, he turned the screen toward her. A new contract? A real one this time. No fake dates, no performed affection, no time limits or termination clauses. Zuri read through the document, her expression shifting from curiosity to amazement to something that might have been tears. Instead of corporate language and legal protections, Jae-min had written what amounted to a love letter disguised as a legal document. Agreement for lifetime partnership between Han Jae-min and Zuri Bennett. Whereas both parties have discovered that the most binding contracts are written in the heart rather than on paper. Whereas fake love has evolved into real commitment through shared trauma, mutual respect, and the courage to choose each other daily. Whereas both parties agree that love requires not just feeling, but decision, action, and the willingness to prioritize each other's happiness alongside their own. Therefore, we commit to the following terms, enforceable by conscience rather than law. 1. To choose each other every morning, not because we're bound by obligation, but because we wake up grateful to share our lives. 2. To protect each other's dreams while building new ones together. 3. To face whatever storms come, corporate, personal, or meteorological, as partners rather than individuals. 4. To honor the people who brought us together, the uncle who died saving others. the brother whose memory guides our choices, and the little girl who may someday call us parents. 5. To remember that the best relationships aren't perfect. They're real. Jae-min, Zuri whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The signature line is optional, he said quickly, suddenly uncertain. I know we've been through a lot, and if you need more time to decide what you really want. She silenced him by reaching across the table and pulling him toward her, kissing him with the kind of certainty that required no contracts or negotiations. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears. I love you, she said simply. Actually, genuinely, completely love you. Not because you saved my life, not because you're rich or powerful or good at managing corporate crises. I love you because you turn fear into safety for other people, because you play piano in the evening when you think no one is listening, because you learn to swim to honor your uncle's sacrifice. I love you because you're brave enough to nearly drown for your art, stubborn enough to refuse my mother's manipulations, and generous enough to forgive me for starting this whole thing with lies. They signed the new contract together, their names intertwining on the page like their lives had intertwined through circumstances that started impossible and became inevitable. So, Zuri said as they watched their real signatures dry on a document that would never be legally binding, but would govern every day of their shared future. What happens now? Now we plan a wedding. A real one, with your family and mine, with friends who know the truth about how we met and still think we're perfect for each other. And after that, we build a life that's better than any contract we could have written. We travel, we work, we argue about whose turn it is to make coffee, and we love each other through all of it. What about kids? The question surprised them both. It had slipped out naturally, the way real couples discuss real futures. Do you want kids? Jae-min asked carefully. With you? Yes. Someday, when we're ready to be completely terrified and completely happy at the same time. I'd like that. Little swimmers who aren't afraid of the water. Little musicians who get your talent and my stubbornness. God help us all, Zuri laughed. As they prepared to leave the conference room and the chapter of their lives defined by contracts and corporate strategy, Jae-min paused at the door. Zuri? Yes? Thank you. For agreeing to the fake relationship, for making it real, for choosing me when you could have walked away. Thank you for pulling me out of that water, for keeping me safe while I figured out how to love you, and for writing a contract that's actually a promise. They walked out of Han Industries together, leaving behind the documents that had brought them together and carrying with them something far more valuable, the certainty that some of the best love stories begin with the worst circumstances, and that real commitment doesn't need signatures. It just needs two people willing to choose each other, every day, forever. The most binding contracts aren't written in legalese. They're written in the daily decision to love someone despite all the reasons it would be easier not to. 6 months later, Zuri stood at the edge of Hyundai Beach on a clear Saturday morning, wearing a simple white sundress and feeling like she was about to perform the most important scene of her life. The beach was mostly empty, early enough to avoid crowds, calm enough that the water looked like glass. Behind her, a small group had gathered. Maya, who'd flown in from Los Angeles with tears in her eyes and a camera in her hands. Se-ra, who'd become more friend than publicist. Jae-min's diving instructor, Coach Park, and several members of the Tide Safe development team who'd wanted to witness this moment. You don't have to do this, Jae-min said quietly, standing beside her at the water's edge. No one expects you to prove anything. I'm not doing it for anyone else. Zuri's voice was steady, but her hand trembled slightly as she touched the scar on her wrist. I'm doing it because I need to know that I can enter this water by choice, not just survive being pulled from it. 6 months of swimming lessons, 6 months of therapy, 6 months of learning to separate panic from caution. But more than that, 6 months of building a life with someone who understood that healing wasn't a destination, but a daily practice. The Tide Safe app on her phone showed green across the beach. Safe conditions, gentle currents, perfect visibility. The same technology that had saved hundreds of lives during typhoon season now confirmed what her eyes could see. The water that had nearly killed her was, on this morning, simply water. "Ready?" asked the lifeguard they'd hired for the event, a young woman whose job was to remain invisible unless needed. Zuri nodded, then walked into the sea. The first steps were the hardest, ankle-deep water that triggered muscle memory of being pulled under. But her heart rhythm remained steady, her breathing controlled by months of practice, and the knowledge that this time, she was choosing every step, waist-deep. The water was warm from the morning sun, gentle against her skin rather than grasping at her ankles, chest-deep. Her cardiac arrhythmia gave a single flutter, then settled into its normal pattern, shoulder-deep. She turned back toward the beach, seeing the faces of people who'd helped her reach this moment. Maya grinning through tears, Coach Park nodding encouragement, Se-ra actually smiling instead of checking her phone, and Jae-min standing at the water's edge with his hands at his sides, letting her make this journey alone, but ready to move if she needed him. She dove. Under the water, everything was blue silence and floating dreams. She swam 10 meters out, then back toward shore, her stroke confident and strong. When she surfaced, she was laughing with the pure joy of someone who'd reclaimed something she'd thought was lost forever. "I did it," she called out, treading water in the same spot where she'd nearly drowned 6 months ago. The small crowd on the beach erupted in cheers, but Zuri's eyes were fixed on Jae-min, who was now walking into the water toward her. When he reached her, he didn't immediately pull her to safety or offer rescue. Instead, he extended his hand, not to save her, but to swim with her. "Want to go a little farther?" he asked. Together? Always together. They swam parallel to the shore, two people who'd learned that love wasn't about rescuing each other, but about choosing to be brave together. The water that had brought them together through trauma now carried them forward through healing. When they finally returned to the beach, both were grinning like children who'd just discovered they could fly. "How do you feel?" Maya asked, wrapping Zuri in a towel. "Like I can do anything," Zuri replied, then looked at Jae-min with the expression of someone who'd just realized the full scope of her own strength. "Like we can do anything." That afternoon, as they drove back to Seoul, Zuri's phone buzzed with a text from her literary agent in Los Angeles. "Just finished reading your completed screenplay. The Tide Carried Us Home is the most beautiful love story I've read in years. 3 production companies want to meet with you next week. Congratulations. You've written something extraordinary." "Good news?" Jae-min asked, reading her expression. "The best news. My Korean sabbatical screenplay. Someone wants to turn it into a movie." "What's it about?" Zuri grinned, settling back into her seat as Seoul's skyline appeared on the horizon. The city that had become home, not because it was familiar, but because it was where she'd learned to love fearlessly. It's about a woman who nearly drowns on her first day in a foreign country, gets saved by a mysterious stranger, agrees to a fake relationship that becomes real, and discovers that sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst circumstances. Sounds familiar. How does it end? With 2 people standing in the water that almost destroyed them, holding hands not because one needs saving, but because they choose to face the tide together. The most beautiful endings are the ones where rescue becomes partnership, survival becomes strength, and the hand that once pulled you from the depths becomes the one you hold as you dive back in, by choice. Epilogue. The Tide Carried Us Home. 1 year later, the global launch event for TideSafe took place on Hyundai Beach, where technology and human courage had first intersected in the story of a drowning woman and the man who saved her. The app now operated in 12 countries, had prevented over 3,000 water-related accidents, and had become the international standard for coastal safety technology. But for Zuri and Jae-min, standing together on the stage as keynote speakers, the numbers mattered less than the faces in the crowd. Families who were whole because warning systems worked, children who'd learned to respect rather than fear the water, couples who'd found love in the midst of crisis. "A year ago," Jae-min said into the microphone, his voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd of tech developers, safety officials, and international media, "My wife nearly drowned in these waters because the technology to prevent such accidents didn't exist. Today, That technology protects millions of people across 4 continents. Zuri stepped forward, her hand finding his with the natural ease of 2 people who'd learned to present as a genuine team rather than a performed couple. But the most important thing we learned isn't about technology or water safety or even love stories that begin with near-death experiences. She looked out at the crowd, seeing not just the press and officials, but the faces of ordinary people whose lives had been touched by their story. The swimming instructors, the lifeguards, the families who downloaded TideSafe and felt safer because of it. We learned that the tide doesn't just carry away, she continued. Sometimes, if you're willing to trust it, the tide carries you home. The ceremony concluded with the dedication of the Han Jin-ho Memorial Foundation for Water Safety Education, represented by a sculpture on Haeundae Beach that captured the moment when a hand breaks through water to offer rescue, or invitation. As the sun set over Busan, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Zuri and Jaemin walked hand in hand along the beach where their story had begun. Behind them, their wedding party was in full swing, Maya dancing with Se-ra, Coach Park teaching swimming techniques to fascinated guests, and Young-suk holding court with a group of international safety officials who were genuinely impressed by her son's technological innovation. "Any regrets?" Jaemin asked as they reached the water's edge, the same spot where he'd pulled her from the rip current 13 months ago. "Only that it took a near-death experience to bring us together," Zuri replied. "Though I suppose some love stories need dramatic beginnings. What would you have preferred? Meeting at a coffee shop, a bookstore, through mutual friends? Meeting you exactly as we did, but with me being a stronger swimmer?" They laughed, the sound mixing with the gentle waves that lapped at their feet. In the distance, fireworks began exploding over Busan Harbor, not for them specifically, but for the summer festival that happened to coincide with their wedding day. Still, they felt like the pyrotechnics were celebrating their story. The contractual marriage that became real love, the fake relationship that evolved into genuine partnership, the rescue that transformed into mutual choosing. "Mrs. Han," Jaemin said formally, using the name she'd legally taken but which still sounded like a gift every time he said it. "Mr. Han," she replied with equal formality. "I love you. Really, genuinely, completely love you. Not because you make good copy, or because you're good for my corporate image, or because you helped launch TideSafe successfully. Why then? Because you turn fear into strength. Because you write love stories in real life. Because you chose to marry me twice. Once for convenience, once for keeps. And somehow made both decisions feel like coming home. The kiss that followed tasted like sea salt and champagne, like promises kept and adventures yet to begin. When they broke apart, both were smiling with the particular joy of people who'd survived the worst and found something beautiful on the other side. Above them, the fireworks reached their crescendo, painting the night sky in colors that reflected off the water like scattered diamonds. And on Haeundae Beach, 2 people who'd learned that love could grow from impossible circumstances stood hand in hand, watching the tide that had once threatened to separate them, now carrying their reflected images toward a horizon bright with possibility. In the end, the best contracts aren't written in boardrooms or enforced by law. They're written in the daily choice to love someone despite all the reasons it would be easier not to. Signed in the moment when 2 people decide that home isn't a place. It's whoever you choose to face the tide with, again and again, for the rest of your life. Sometimes the hand that saves you becomes the hand that holds you. Sometimes the current that nearly drowns you becomes the tide that carries you home. And sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the words, "I have you," and end with the promise, "I choose you."